Pastor Bill Wylie Kellerman brings me to tears. Isn't it incredible human being? So there's nothing else to say but to put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, for Pastor Billy Wylie Kellerman of St. Paul's Episcopal Church.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you to Satori and to all the storytellers of the evening. The last time that I tried to cross into Canada, I was stopped at the border. After a few questions, I was sent to a waiting area, and I waited a long time. Eventually, a woman came to the plexiglass window, and she had a pretty thick computer printout. And she said, have you ever been arrested? I said, yeah. She said, tell me about depredation of property in Alexandria, Virginia in 1979. I said, I think that was the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, and we poured blood on the pillars of the Pentagon and used our bodies to lock the door shut as a protest against U.S. nuclear policy. She looked down this list, and I knew it was my rap sheet. What I'd actually like to think of as a history of conscience, in a way. I wondered what all was there. I knew it was not just Pentagon, but there could be the White House, SAC bases, missile factories, the federal buildings here in Detroit, the Detroit Economic Club. One time I was arrested for dumpster diving food for a soup kitchen in Grand Rapids. And I actually fell in love with my wife, Jeannie, when we were handcuffed together repeatedly, coming and going from the Oakland County Jail. We were charged with contempt and conspiracy under the prosecutorial regime of L. Brooks Patterson in those days. My first arrest was when I was in seminary in New York, Columbia University. I'd fallen under the sway of Daniel Berrigan. Berrigan is a Jesuit priest, a poet, a prophet of nonviolence, and he came to the seminary fresh from 2 years in federal prison for burning draft files in Catonsville, Maryland, as a protest against the war in Southeast Asia. And he knocked me off my horse. Here I was, raised in the church, already in seminary, and suddenly I'm going through a conversion to the gospel. Berrigan, it was the way he read scripture. It was his life, of course, but the way that he read scripture, not just as a poet, though that too, but as if it was a matter of life and death. He followed a Jesus who was executed for resistance to official violence of occupation and empire, and now I was following too. Actually, I think the seed of this call, I know it went back further, because one time I was rummaging through my attic and stumbled on my high school term paper, and it was on civil disobedience. I was actually shocked to even remember it. And so Gandhi and Thoreau, but especially Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, where he explains the importance of direct action and civil disobedience in the freedom struggle. Last year, you may know, was the 50th anniversary of that letter. I went to Cooley High School, I graduated in 1967, and I know that that letter affected how I saw the smoke rising from 12th Street that summer, the Detroit Rebellion. I remember there's a passage, I won't quote it accurately, but Dr. King is accused of bringing violence to Birmingham, and he says, "We didn't bring violence to Birmingham. Violence was here. We just brought it into the open, into the light of day." Well, as I say, last year was the 50th anniversary of that letter, and on the very same day, April 16th, the Detroit City Council voted on the Jones Day contract. Jones Day is as you know, is the third largest law firm in the world, and their main clients are the very banks that have eaten the substance out of our neighborhoods with predatory mortgages, and the same banks who have made predatory loans to the city of Detroit, the so-called swaps and cops. It's the law firm of the emergency manager, Kevin Orr. As of this week, Detroit's been under emergency management for a year. Can you believe that virtually every African-American city in the state of Michigan, half the African-American population, live under non-elected governments? 3/4 of the black elected officials in this state have been replaced by emergency managers. So when the Jones Day contract came up for a vote before City Council, I kind of knew this was an important moment. And a group of us, mostly young people actually, went to City Council that morning. We spoke during the public comment period. I actually talked about the anniversary of the letter and how it's addressed to white pastors. Dr. King expresses great disappointment at the tepid passivity of white pastors in the freedom struggle, and that made a claim on me. So when the moment came for the vote, the group of us knelt down in the aisle, and we began to sing. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. But when we did that, several things happened. One was that it almost released and freed the whole crowd who was there, maybe 60 or 80 people there to speak on this issue and others. And they all rose up and started addressing the council directly. And there was lots of anger actually in the room. I remember one man pounding his hand on the rail in front of the council area. There was a Korean War veteran who pleaded with the council. He said, "I fought for this country for 4 years, and now they're going to take my house away in foreclosure." And there was lots of anger and chaos. So we would sing slowly and loudly to try to bring the focus down. There was one woman gorgeously dressed with this wide brim Sunday morning hat. I think she was there to talk about her mother's water bill. And she came and stood with us, and she had the voice of an angel. And when she sang, suddenly it's like we were a choir with harmony and rhythm. Well, we expected that we would be arrested pretty quickly, but in fact we sang for an hour and a half. we could see the police arrive. They actually, officers came pretty quickly. We could see them through the glass doors there. They had handcuffs ready to go. Most of the council had left the room, and some of them had appeared with the police and were clearly urging arrest. On the other hand, there were two council members, Councilwoman Joanne Watson and Brenda Jones, who stayed right in their seats. I think on the one hand to witness what was happening and receive it, but I think also to protect us. So the police were put in this conflict. I think they were conflicted in themselves as well. On the one hand, they were under orders. On the other hand, it's their pensions that are now up for grabs at the hands of Jones Day, and they knew that. They knew that. The other thing that happened, and I've never had this before, that someone I know a little bit began whispering in my ear, saying, "Reverend, you've done what you came to do. It's, you know, time to stop." And I said, "No, I'm not stopping." And he came back a minute later, and the voice whispering in my ear said, "Reverend Charles Williams, who I do know and trust and work with, he wants you to stop. He thinks it's time to stop." I doubted that was true, but I said, "I'm not stopping." And the voice came one more time saying, "We have the votes to stop this thing. We need to let them vote." And that was not true. That proved not to be true. And it was also an untruth that was now being spread through the crowd. Now, I've had voices like that in my head before. You know, don't do this. You've taken this far enough. You know, stop now. But I've never had, you know, this literal whispering in my ear. And I think about how the Detroit media in Detroit are whispering all the time in our ears, saying, "This is just the way it is, and there's nothing you can do about it." Well, eventually the officers did come in. The woman with the broad Sunday cap, bless her soul, she was with us. She was ready to go. She held out her hands to be handcuffed. So did the Korean War veteran, offered himself to be part of it. But in the end, only two of us were arrested, myself and Elena Harada, a member of the elected Detroit School Board, a warrior in the struggle for children and for justice in this city. And we were handcuffed and taken through the crowd and down the elevator to Jefferson to a big waiting blue police school bus. And we went to the back of the bus thinking, oh, there are going to be more waves of arrests and this thing's going to fill up. And, but it wasn't long, and the bus pulled out. We had the bus to ourselves going to the precinct, where we were congenially processed. And I should say that when we were released under our own recognizance, that the police officers thanked us and hugged us. In the months that followed, we had a number of times in 36th District Court. At the arraignment, we requested a jury trial. And the judge said, why do you want a jury trial for a petty misdemeanor? And we said, because under emergency management, a jury is the last vestige of democracy in the city of Detroit. And that's true. We were defending ourselves. We didn't want lawyers. The judge and the prosecutor and any number of people would repeatedly say to us when we said we're defending ourselves, they would quote the adage, if a lawyer who defends him or herself has a fool for a client, right? I think the implication was we had fools for lawyers. But we knew that we would be able to speak more freely, and we wanted to put ourselves on the stand. And our idea was to put Jones Day on trial. And we had a number of witnesses, including the Honorable Joanne Watson, prepared to testify, who could say she was there, she could say what happened, but she would also be an expert witness on the state of Detroit, on the conflict of interest involved in the legal malfeasance involved in this contract. I was already, on the day of the trial, I was thinking, if we got to the end of the trial, what I would say to the jury in my closing statement, you know. And because juries, if you get to that point, juries are instructed, you know, you can consider this, but you can't consider this, you know, you can, and what they can't consider is conscience, their conscience, the context for action, and what's going on in the city. And I was trying to think how I could let them know the power that they actually have, because in the end, they just say guilty or not guilty. They have way more power than they're allowed to know. And that's what it comes down to in being the last vestige of democracy. Well, on the morning of the trial, the police officers didn't show up. And they were the prosecution's whole case. And I don't know, was it the weather, the polar vortex? Did they make a decision? Did they think they were giving us a gift? I don't know, but in the event of their not being there, the judge dismissed the charges against us, and we never got to say what we did or why we did it. Which I suppose is why I'm telling you tonight. Maybe story listeners are the last vestige of democracy in Detroit. Conscience prevails. Next week, I'm going to New York City just for a day or two. I'm going to see Daniel Berrigan, who's 93. His mind is very sharp, but his body is really, really frail. And I want to thank him, not only for the 50-some books that he's written that have, you know, moved my soul, but for the quality of his life and his witness of action over and over and over. And maybe I'll end with a poem of his. He's a brilliant poet. So this is something just short. For every 10,000 words, there's a deed floating somewhere, head down, unborn. Words can't make it happen. They only wave it away unwanted. Yet, child, necessary one, unless you come home to these hands, why hands at all? Your season, your cries are their skill, their reason. Thank you.
Pastor Bill Wylie Kellerman.